So welcome everybody. I'll get started and just do a few housekeeping introduction basically. My name's Tamsin and I'm the events officer at Majjistral Park. I just want to let you know that everyone's muted and your videos are turned off at the moment, but feel free to turn them on. It is being recorded, but your video won't appear on the screen unless you say something. And if you do want to post a question, you can post it in the chat, or we'll be having a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So if you want to ask questions, then that's fine. And we're thinking it should be about 45 minutes, and then with questions and answers at the end, we'll probably go to about an hour. So with us today, we have Mr. Natalino Fenek, who is an ornithologist, a lecturer, and a brilliant bird photographer. And we're quite excited to have him with us today to talk about bird migration. And I think we can get started. So I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so hello everybody. There are some names, some people I know here, and some others I know just by name, some others I know of because I've met or I've known personally. I'm very happy to be here. I hope to infect you with some enthusiasm about birds. Birds have been my lifelong passion. I'm 58, just a bit of introduction about me. Actually, I come from a family of hunters. So grandfathers from both sides of the family used to hunt, and my uncles used to hunt, and as a little boy I used to go and hunt with them. And as a young boy I used to dream of having a farm and having a big collection of stuffed birds. That is how people are usually take the road and become part of the hunting lobby, so to speak. But there used to be a lot of articles in the press in favor and about hunting when I was about 13. And my mother introduced me to what was then the Malta Ornithological Society. And there's a little incident I will recount before I start this conversation, because it has influenced me all my life, really, because I was with my uncle hunting. We used to go hunting near Ta'ali. I used to live near Attad. And our dog flushed a snipe, and my uncle shot it. And when the dog brought it back, I had never seen a snipe in my life. It was so beautiful. I saw some pictures of snipes later on, and I couldn't let it go from my hands. And the following day, we were at Shamshia, and at the time there were always guns in the luggage booth, and people took their guns with them wherever they went. It was a Sunday picnic, and there were two people ringing birds at Shamshia, and they caught a snipe. And I was marveled with this snipe. Yesterday I had one dead in my hand, and today there was one alive, and it was so beautiful. And I kept telling them not to release it because they'll kill it. Don't release it because they'll kill it. Don't release it because they'll kill it. And that incident was like the road to Damascus vision for me. It really changed me outright. I mean, it made me hate guns like nothing else could have in my life. And I was 13. I wanted to change the world, and very soon I became an anti-hunting warrior in the Malta Ornithological Society at the time. I led a lot of campaigns when bird life was still in MOS, and we're meant to be talking about migration, but I have to say this because when I look back, if you want people to change, you have to give them an opportunity to change. I mean, there's a time for war and a time for peace. And I really think that if we really want hunters to change, we have to involve them. I mean, at the moment, there is a lot of us and them attitudes. Everybody's protecting his patch, and nobody's protecting the birds. And I hope that through these presentations, today I will touch a few people's hearts about migration, about what birds have to endure and what birds go to. And this is the kind of thing that I think will lead people to look at things in a different way. So I'll start sharing my screen, and we will look at bird migration. I'm going to speak about bird migration a bit in general, but I will also speak about migration in molt as well. So when we speak about migration, I've removed my screen, so I don't know if you can still see me or not, but I'm not seeing any of you because I think this putting me on the screen there will interfere with some of the graphics that I have on this presentation. So when we speak about migration, you know, we speak about a dual journey. Usually, we understand the dual journey. So if you look up some graphics from the internet on migration, it's a regular seasonal movement, usually or often from north to south, and it is undertaken by many species of birds between breeding grounds and wintering grounds, and then birds will fly back. So very often we speak about migration as a north-south affair, but in many instances it's not really north-south, because a lot of birds fly usually from the northeast to the southwest, and it's a little detail, but makes a big difference because you see a lot of these graphics like the ones I'm showing online. These are not entirely correct. They are correct for some species, but not for others, because there are different migration strategies from different species, and we'll go into some of these in due course. But generically, I mean, you can get, when we're speaking about birds, there are different kinds of birds. There are broad-winged birds, birds which have big wings, which have wide wings, and these have certain tendencies when they migrate. For example, birds which have long and wide wings tend to prefer narrow crossings, which sounds a bit strange. They have big wings, but they hate big sea crossings. And we'll go into some detail about this later. And then you have small birds with little wings, and then they take these phenomenal journeys across the seas, which we are beginning to get to know more about now, because technology is allowing us to do certain things with birds that 20 years ago wasn't possible. So migration occurs mainly in the northern hemisphere, where birds are funneled from specific routes by natural barriers, such as mountains, seas. And some birds go through these funnels, and some birds go on a broad front migration course. So the funnel is not really the funnel we have in the kitchen that funnels everyone through the same route, but more or less a lot of birds would be passing through that route. So if we look at this graphic here, this is the world. Obviously, you recognize the world, and the lines. And the lines that you will see moving. I have to see how to activate the video. Okay, those lines, those are all different species of birds which have been tracked by satellite. So you can see their movements. They are like tadpoles in the water, actually. But you can see them going, this is spring migration for them, because they're going from Africa into Europe. So you've got different species of birds from different countries, the ones from the UK going to northern Scandinavia, the ones from Scandinavia going to Iceland, okay, the ones in the Asian region, all going in different directions, but mainly going south to north, so to speak. Some of them going south again. This is the autumn migration now. So you'd see these lines zigzagging across the globe, going to different places on Earth, mainly in search of food, because migration is primarily driven by availability of food. So this is a taste of things to come. Technology is allowing us to see these things. So birds basically move because of a number of situations. So hoopoes, this is a bird that we'll be looking forward to see. We've already been seeing a few of them since very early, actually. I mean, we've had the first records this year on 27 January, which is very early, because normally we start seeing them from 10 February onwards. Most of the first changes we speak about when we speak about migration is that birds move in response to changes in food availability. And one thing that I will tell you, so we often speak about spring migration and autumn migration. And whatever books you read about birds will speak about spring and autumn migration, but now a lot of books are correcting that in the sense that they are speaking about outward migration and return migration. So they no longer speak of spring migration in the spring, but speak about outward migration or return migration, sorry. And this is because spring starts on 21st March, as you all know, but spring migrants start appearing at the end of January and early February. So this is before spring starts. So that's why they had to sort of correct this idea of spring and autumn migration. So there's quite a lot of things that we know about birds, but there's a lot more that we have yet to discover. So we have bird movements that come in response to changes in habitat. And this is also in a way related to food, because when there is change in habitat, there is a different amount of insects available, a different amount of seeds available. So it all boils down to changes in habitat, changes in day length, and literally changes in food. We get birds moving in response to changes in weather. For example, we have birds which are true migrants, which migrate every year in similar patterns. Some of them migrate in identical patterns, but some of them appear only once every couple of years. For example, in Malta, birds like siskins and hawfinches, Tazabuchi, Yawakri, Maltese, they are not regular migrants, but there are some years when they are very, very common, and some years when they are practically absent. And this happens because the birds are not true migrants, but usually they fly certain stretches, certain distances in search of food. If the food is available, they stop there. If the food isn't available, they keep going south. So when we see these large influxes of certain species here, which don't normally move, it's because of this. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind about migration is that birds, they don't have the meteorological office at the back of their hand. So when they leave, they know what the weather is in the place they have left, but they cannot anticipate what they will encounter on the way. And migration is a very perilous journey, and a lot of birds die on migration because of winds, because of natural barriers, and because of other things we'll speak about. So birds may have left their cozy roosting site at 2 a.m. in the morning, and they are flying at 2,000 feet or 4,000 feet, even higher, because usually most of the birds have been found to migrate. When they leave their roosts, usually they start their migration at about 2,000 meters, some of them at 5,000 meters, and anywhere in between. And it's been found by radar studies that usually the birds that start their migration at 2,000 meters try to continue their journey in that pocket of 2,000 meters throughout their flight until they land. So birds migrate in strong winds, migrate in rain. This is a graphic of America. These are weather radars stationed in different parts of the United States. And there's a pilot project going on in Europe, which is parallel to this, studying animal movement by radar. And what they do is, the radars are usually formatted to collect only weather data. So they dump all other things that they classify as noise. But there have been some brilliant ornithologists who are also computer gurus who realized that some of that noise is birds. And they started convincing Met Offices around the world to not to clean so much data, because there is a lot of insect and bird data in these algorithms that are produced by radars. And if we have a look at this, let me try and activate it. So you will see clouds moving there, but you will also start seeing dots here on the left-hand side, which grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Those are birds leaving the roost and starting to migrate, and they are being picked up by radars in different places. And you can see them getting bigger and moving southwest, and then you don't see them anymore because the birds have settled, so the radars are not capturing them anymore. So you would see that this kind of weather data is very important. This is a video from October 2008. So the big influx of birds leaving different states in the United States, basically at the same time, and all of them are going to the southwest. So if you had to analyze individual data from these radars, you would see that, for example, the birds that have left Valletta at 2 o'clock in the morning would be the birds that the radar in Birkirkara would pick up at 10 minutes past 2 o'clock, and the one in Melliha 20 minutes later. So you could really see the movement on the radar going on in this way. So birds prefer to fly at night now for a number of reasons. Wind speed and turbulence are often weaker at that time of the day. As we know, wind often dies at night. And also, they are less prone to being preyed upon by predators at the time. So the first thing I told you is that migration is primarily driven by food. And we can see that even in our countryside and in gardens, for if any of you happen to put out some bird food, for example, in the garden. It happens even with sparrows and robins that will visit your garden. Birds fight over food. So we see these conflicts. Even when food is available, birds become territorial, and when another species comes to their patch, they try to drive it away. So cute as they look, birds are also involved in a lot of litigation. So the birds leave areas where the day is about to start getting shorter, and obviously food availability becomes scarce also because of the climate. So at the moment, there's quite a lot of food available in Africa for them, but they know that food availability is going to shrink, and they have to go to places where the day is longer and they can find food, which is more abundant throughout the hours of the day, and the day is often always longer. And one of the things that has happened over the past few years, I mean, climate change is really affecting a large number of species. Again, this is an area where we know a lot, but there is a lot where we don't know. But from what we know already, we can already notice that some species are suffering a lot because of climate change. For example, pied flycatchers in Holland. Pied flycatchers are black and white birds that usually see in the Maltese Islands in April. They come at the same season when turtle doves come usually. In fact, in some places in Malta, they call them Asfotalgamin, birds of turtle doves, because when they appear, turtle doves appear too. They are these little black and white birds catching flies in our countryside, and they stay here for a couple of days before going to Europe. And in Holland, they noticed that over a very short period of time, over a 10-year period, the population of pied flycatchers dropped by half. Half of the pied flycatchers disappeared. And they were trying to find out the reason why. There were a lot of theories, pesticides, this, that, and the other. And then they realized that pied flycatchers usually arrive in Holland in the first half of April. So usually at the same time that we start seeing birds here, in the first 15 days of April. And birds arrived at their breeding sites. Within a few days, they find a breeding site, they find a mate, and they build a nest. And 3 weeks later, they have their brood, the young hatch. And so that puts us in the first week of May. And the first brood used to coincide with the peak of the caterpillar season. So the butterflies would have laid the eggs, and a few days later, there are tiny caterpillars, and within a week, the caterpillars are quite big. And those are ideal food for the young pied flycatchers. So the adults could find a lot of food to feed their brood, and the brood flies successfully for usually 4 birds. And they would have a second brood, another 4 birds. So a pair would raise 8 young successfully in a year. Because of mortality, usually half of the birds born in the first year die of some causes, natural causes or man-made causes or whatever. So pied flycatchers needed 2 broods to keep the population to a stable level. Because by doubling the population in spring, half of them are going to die on migration, half of them are going to die within the first year, and more of them die in winter, and the population remains more or less at a certain level if each pair raises 8 birds. What happened is that with climate change, butterflies started breeding earlier. So when the pied flycatchers arrived in April, there's already the peak of butterflies and of caterpillars. So the first brood is successful, but the second brood isn't, or else instead of 4, they managed to raise 1 or 2 from each nest. So suddenly from 8 birds per family, we are seeing 4, 5, or 6, and that causes a population to crash over a very short period of time. So climate change has a terrible impact on some species because of these shifts. So food is a major issue for birds. A lot of birds are omnivorous. They don't just eat insects, but they can also eat seeds and pieces of grass and other things, depending on what they find, of course. But some birds specialize in feeding on insects, like, for example, white wagtails, which feed on insects that crawl over the ground usually, or other species that dig them from the ground. Wagtails also catch birds that can fly. And as I said, food is a source of conflict, both between birds that live here all year round, like sparrows, for example. This is a picture taken at Majjistral. I mean, we used to put out quite a lot of food, but still birds fight over it. And the fights aren't very long, but they're long enough to scare some of the birds away. Not a very pleasant sight, actually, quite aggressive, but short-lasting, usually not very damaging to any of them, but it serves the purpose of scaring the other bird away and the bird taking the food. So, but conflict also occurs with migrants. So sparrows are here all year round, and migrants or winter visitors have to compete with food with the birds that are here. I mean, obviously, tensions are around because it's obvious there isn't enough food for everybody. Birds try to eat before it is their turn. So migrants can be quite aggressive, as you can see. So sparrows are resident. A sparrow is even larger and heavier than a wagtail, but the wagtail knows what to do to scare sparrows away when it's looking for insects in its patch. So there is this kind of conflict going on every day. Even migrants between themselves. So here we have a wagtail and the robin, intruding in each other's areas. So they live together only in theory. So I mean, robins are in the trees, wagtails are on the ground. So as soon as a robin spots an insect, a spider, or whatever, it tries to take it. If a wagtail is in the area, there will be conflict about it. So, and quite a lot of migrants often meet in such places. I mean, this is a part of the cliff edge in Majjistral Park. So on the far right, we have a wheatear. On the far left, wheatear is a spring visitor. They start visiting us at this time of the year. And on the far left, we have a meadow pipit. And in the foreground, there's a stonechat. These last 2 birds are winter visitors that have been here since October, and they are now about to leave. So migrants coming from Africa come into contact with migrants that have wintered in our islands, and they are about to leave, both of them, for different destinations in Europe. And this was a day when there was quite some rain, and you can see some of the birds are a bit wet. And the wheatears, as soon as they start coming in from the sea, they would be looking for food. And this is also when a lot of conflict usually ensues between birds, because birds are hungry and they want to eat, and that is where the conflict starts. So migration carries a very high mortality rate, also because of natural factors, wind, rain. So we often are told that birds have feathers which are waterproof. To a certain extent they are, but they cannot extend, their waterproofing doesn't extend beyond a few minutes in a lot of rain, for example. So if there is a heavy shower, a heavy downpour for a long time over the sea, you can rest assured that that is killing a lot of birds. And we know that this is true, for example, because very often when fishermen catch fish, such as sharks, for example, a lot of these would have a lot of bird rings in their stomach. And these are not birds that they caught. but the birds that they would have found on the surface of the sea while these birds would have fallen in the sea while migrating, and they cannot make it. And it's not something that we see often, but sometimes it happens that you're bird watching along the coast and you're using your binoculars, and you spot a tiny bird coming in from a distance, I don't know, 500 meters away. And it happens more than once for us to see a bird, and then you recognize it's a robin when it's 300 meters away, and you see it's struggling to arrive, and 50 meters away from the coast, the bird falls in the sea and doesn't make it. So that bird would have flown, who knows, 1,000 kilometers at least, or even more perhaps, only to die within 50 meters of the coast because it couldn't make it. So migration carries a very, very high mortality rate. So as you can see, this week here is quite wet. It was raining a few minutes before it landed. If this bird was, I don't know, a kilometer more out at sea, it would have probably never reached land. So weather really takes a big toll of migrants. This is a chiff-chaff here again. You cannot really see it well in this picture, but the bird is actually sheltering from the rain under a stone. So that's a wintering species. So it was with us all winter. And you can see that waterproofing on birds isn't as effective as we think it is. So birds can take some rain. They cannot take extended periods of rain for a long time. I mean, it will kill them. Of course, there are other things that lead to birds dying. Some of them are man-made, oil and chemical spills. A lot of them happen without us knowing. If anyone takes a little walk on our rugged coastline, you would see how many balls of tar and other oil residue you can find on our coast. So you can imagine the amount of chemicals in the sea that exist. And a bird doesn't need this amount of oil on its body to kill it, because the problem with oil is when a bird gets some tar on its feathers, even if it's just a little bit of tar, they try to preen it, they try to clean it with their mouths. So and they ingest the chemicals, and it is not the tar on their feathers that kills them, but the tar that they swallow. So this bird, as ugly as it is with that amount of oil in it, if taken into a rehabilitation center, most of that can be probably cleaned off, and the feathers will come to life again. But the amount of oil it would have ingested would kill it. So it's not what you see from the outside only that kills the bird, but also what they ingest. There are other factors. So we see these cleanup activities, and most of the birds that are taken from these cleanup activities usually end up dying. Very sad sights when there are oil spills, especially in important bird areas. But there are other man-made obstacles, power lines, for example, wind turbines, glass structures. The effect of wind turbines on birds is something that is always being studied. In reality, we do not know how many birds are being killed by wind turbines. In some places, it's quite a lot. And they've been trying to employ new technology so that the birds see the rotating blades and this, that, and the other. And still, birds are being killed by wind turbines. But glass structures, for example, kill a lot of birds, especially in Europe, and especially at night. In America, there was when they were making commemorations of 9/11, for example, in the initial years, they were commemorating the people who died by floodlighting the sky with huge, powerful lights. And they stopped doing that because they realized they were literally massacring a lot of birds. Migrating birds were distracted by lights and flying into glass, into big skyscrapers. And if you Google this, you will see a lot of sad sights of heaps of dead birds which hit glass. So there's quite a lot of things which is killing birds. I don't know if you're seeing the whole screen or whether you're seeing anything on the screen, because I've got this annoying bar which I'm trying to remove. I don't know if you can see that too, but anyway.
It's fine. I can't see a.
Okay, all right, because I'm seeing a bar on my screen and it's a bit annoying.
Okay.
Okay. So plastic also kills a lot of birds. Here we are seeing a young albatross, which was fed with a lot of plastic, and there is so much plastic in their stomach that there's no room for food anymore, and these birds die before having ever had the chance to fly. We see the effects of plastic on birds here too. I mean, I saw Marcus Camilleri in this talk. He's a member of Cacciatore Bird when he's taking care of Ladira safra, and where each year we find a number of gulls which are injured or which would have died because of plastic. So they would have either, last year we had a gull, for example, with which had obviously picked a piece of a handle from a plastic bag in markup and is stuck in its mouth. So the bird would have died because it was unable to eat. It was unable to remove the plastic, and it was unable to eat. And each year we get a number of birds which are being killed by plastic. Fences kill birds too. Birds migrate at night. This is the fence at the Malta International Airport, and there you can see a quail stuck in the fence. I mean, the birds would be flying at quite a velocity, and hitting a fence at that speed is instant death. This is not something unknown because I was speaking to a number of old-time hunters a few years back, and they were telling me, for example, the people who lived in Gzira used to go around Manuel Island in the morning at this time of the year, for example, and they would search for quail which would have hit the wires of the military establishments that they were at the time there. So there in the Sliema Redoutes area, there were some fences there because during the war they were fearing an invasion, and so people would walk along these fences to find quail that had hit these wires too. They wanted to cook them, of course. But I mean, this is a man-made obstacle that we don't think about that can kill birds too. But there you are, you can see it. So plastic kills birds in different ways. Here in the middle, there's an oyster catcher with a top from one of these disposable cups in its beak. Obviously, it could never get rid of it, and it killed it. Other birds, such as guillemots, entangled in plastic, and this kind of thing. Bird lime is a very popular thing by which birds are caught in places like Cyprus, for example, and Lebanon. It's a kind of glue they would apply to sticks, and the birds get stuck to it, and obviously they will take the bird and kill them and plug them to eat them. Of course, there is hunting, which has an impact on birds, especially hunting tourism. Very often in Malta, we get a lot of campaigns about local hunting. One thing that people don't realize, I'm not one who speaks about in favor of spring hunting, because I think birds in spring need to be given a chance to migrate to breed. But what we have done here, inadvertently perhaps, but it's happened and no one is doing anything about it. We exported the problem. So we are happy that turtle doves are not shot anymore, or they are not shot anymore in big numbers in April because they are protected. But now hunters are going to Serbia, to Morocco, to Egypt, to shoot birds on migration there. And very often in these countries, there are no bag limits, or bag limits there are, but they are not respected. It's a big business in these countries. Actually, recently I wrote an article for a British journal about this. It's called Holidays from Hell. And while doing research for it, I realized that in Europe, we are even getting American hunters coming to hunt quail in Europe. So, I mean, hunting pressure from the tourism industries is quite a big thing. Of course, COVID over the past year has slowed a lot of things down. But here you can see, for example, an advert from a local company advertising that you can hunt quail or turtle dove from the 1st August in Serbia, from 15th August in Romania, and whatever, different dates. And these dates make you realize that hunting pressure because of tourism has really increased a lot. So birds are now being pursued in countries where they breed as soon as they are starting to migrate, or before they are starting to migrate. They are hunted before they start to migrate. They are hunted on migration, and they're again hunted for longer times now in their wintering areas. So one thing that we have to keep in mind is that birds that we call European are only in Europe for about 3 months of the year. So European birds are in Europe from April, May, June, maybe July. during the breeding season, and they start their way down to Africa again. And in Africa, they spend from September to February. So basically, when birds are being hunted in Africa, you've got the whole European population in a little place. Africa is a big place, but I mean, the whole European population of turtle doves winters in an area between Senegal and Mali. So people are going to hunt them in Morocco while they are on their way to Senegal and Mali. A lot of French hunters, Spanish hunters, Italian hunters are going to hunt turtle doves in Senegal and Mali from October onwards. So from October, November, December, January, February, 5 months intensive hunting of turtle doves in Africa. So you can imagine the toll. Here we complain about a number of turtle doves. The number of turtle doves being killed every day by hunters in Europe is more than what a hunter would kill in a lifetime here in Malta. I'm not advocating in favor of opening spring hunting, but I'm just mentioning these to make some comparisons. But it's not only hunters who kill birds. Cats, for example. A lot of people here might be cat lovers. You might have cats at home. I'm a strong believer that cats should stay at home. We have a big problem in Malta, and nobody speaks about it because the moment you speak about it, people would want to eat you alive. Cat colonies. People feed cats in the countryside thinking they're doing them a favor. Cats kill a lot of things in the countryside. There's a grebe there. There's a grebe about to dive in the middle of the stream. I don't know if you can see it. And there's a cat on the right-hand side. Luckily, it didn't kill it. But cats in the countryside are a big problem. This cat is at Majjistral. Here it was trying to stalk a blue rock thrush. It didn't kill it because I literally scared it away. The cat is in the background there, and the blue rock thrush is on the stone here. So cats in the countryside are a very big problem, and I'm very upset because a lot of environmental NGOs know what a problem they are, but yet they don't speak about them because they fear that they will upset their members. Drones have become quite fashionable. Here you can see a drone and a bird of prey, busquet. I've never seen a bird-drone collision, but it's also a form of disturbance. I mean, we are disturbance. People are disturbance, okay? This is a group of trekkers at Majjistral, and I'm sure you're only looking at people and dogs, but there's a bird there. And the bird happens to be a dotterel. It's there. Dotterels happen to be a bit of sort of tame species that rely on their camouflage. But when you have people running all over the place, you flash a bird once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and the bird has to leave. And one of the things that I keep telling people who are into photography these days is you have to give the birds some chance, because birds on migration need time to rest and need time to eat. So if there's a bird and you're flushing it constantly, it might make a difference for it between reaching its destination and dying on the way. Activities such as these, one of the biggest problems we have in Malta is obviously space. So we are far too many people on a little rock, and COVID has made matters worse because people are now going in the countryside in droves, and before everybody half of the people at least used to go to Slima, and now everyone wants to go in the countryside, and it's becoming to be a bit complicated with relations between people and landowners. But I'm here mostly to speak about impacts on birds. So Majjistral, again, people with dogs here. Fortunately, I could intervene to stop this. There was somebody from a dog sanctuary who was bringing droves of dogs every day and letting them loose in the park. And the problem is that people give value to dogs more than anything else. I mean, you love your dog more than anything else. And people don't realize the harm that a dog can do. I'll show you in just a minute. Then we have these famous off-roader cyclists who don't just go in parts, but anywhere else. And these are also causing a lot of erosion. It's not only about birds. If you have to go to Mjiba and Mistra and look at the landscape there, a lot of damage has been done by off-road motorcycles, but also by this kind of mountain bikes going through the same tracks in the clay slopes, which is causing a lot of erosion. So this is all part of our environment, and we have to, we're creating an impact on it ourselves too. So it's not, we often point fingers at hunters, but it's not just hunters who are having an impact on the environment and birds. So this is all Majjistral for you. So this kind of activity. So here we have a nest of corn buntings. It's to the right of the screen there, in a big thistle. So when you've got a monster like this driving on the grass, can you tell me how you're going to see that? You know, I've had instances where I had a nest of spectacled warbler which was squashed by a car. The nest was by one of the dirt roads that there is at Majjistral, and we found it squashed on Monday, following the that exists in the park. So the nest is in the middle of something like this. You can never have a hope in hell of seeing that kind of thing unless you have a trained eye. So that's a corn bunting for you. Corn buntings used to breed where you still have 2 to 3 pairs breeding every year at Majjistral, but over the past 2 or 3 years, I don't think there has been any confirmed breeding of them. And this is purely the result of more people walking here and there. I mean, birds need some space. I mean, even if you walk just in the roads, if one person passes by is one thing, you know, if one person every 5 minutes is passing by, it's something else. So disturbance is a very important issue. Another bird that breeds in the park, this is a spectacled warbler, quite an old picture. This is a scan from a slide. They breed in thistles, very low on the ground. They have a lot of natural predation by snakes, even by chameleons. So disturbance bias is all they need, you know. It's a male spectacled warbler. There are quite 3 or 4 pairs still breeding in the park in some areas. And one of the problems with not keeping dogs on the leash is that these birds can lose their nest. I mean, dogs have a good sense of smell. There can be 2 or 3 young in the nest. They call for their parents. They have a very high-pitched note that dogs can hear. And all a dog needs to do to kill the young is just, you know, put his head in the nest in a bit of an aggressive manner, and the nest is gone. So we've got, they now call them Zitting cysticolas. We should call them fan-tailed warblers. You can see the nest here on the left. It's made from spider webs and the kind of things they take from flowers. You can never see these kinds of nests unless you're really trained. So you can easily walk and walk over one of these nests and you know, destroy the eggs or destroy the young. So migration. We go back to migration. You know, many species of birds migrate. This is a view of the park which doesn't exist anymore, I think, Tamsin, because those sites are gone now, I think. These are starlings.
Have been taken down.
Yes, this was a particularly hideous structure, so I'm glad it's no longer there. But some of the other ones, some of the corbel stone ones, they're not that damaging on the environment there. So many species of birds migrate. So we speak of 2 sets of birds. We have non-migrated birds, which are resident or sedentary, like Spanish sparrows. But approximately about 1,800 of the world's 10,000 bird species are long-distance migrants. And the key phrase here is long distance, because some birds can migrate short distances and others migrate longer distances. So many bird populations migrate long distances along what we call a flyway, although the flyway isn't really a highway through which birds migrate. It's usually a generic direction which birds take. So the most common pattern involves flying north in the spring to breed in temperate or Arctic summer, and returning to the autumn to the winter grounds where it's warmer in the south and the day is longer and food is more easily available. And we can be sure that the primary motivation is food, because, for example, hummingbirds are really tiny birds found in South America, and they started putting out nectar feeders for them, especially in hotels, because people realized there that they can make money from birds, because if they have birds in their gardens, people would go there to take pictures of birds, and they started putting feeders. And they realized that when they put feeders, hummingbirds, a lot of them stopped migrating. So it's actually the food that made the birds migrate. So if given food through the winter, the birds stay, and the birds can be as tame as you are seeing in this picture. So those beautiful pictures of hummingbirds you see, and you wonder how these pictures are taken. These pictures are taken over feeders like this. So it's not as difficult as you think to take those kind of pictures. You just need to go there. So the longer days of the northern summer, they provide extended time for breeding birds to feed their young. This is a dotterel, Berino. We see these birds at Majjistral usually from mid-August onwards. There's always one or two there every year. Some of them are hardly ever as beautiful as this, because it's in spring plumage and breeding plumage. Birds in spring are usually more colorful, more attractive, because that's part of the ritual to attract the females. Although in the case of the dotterel, the female lays, but it's the husband that has to brood the eggs. It's a very emancipated bird. Longer days help species produce larger clutches of eggs than those that remain in the tropics. So, for example, the ducks that breed in Northern Europe, they can have large clutches. You know, in this case, this is an eider's nest. There you can see 3, 6, 9, 10 eggs. So quite a big clutch. Of course, survival has an impact. I mean, because otherwise the population swells each year. But they need to lay so many eggs to keep the population stable. So as the days start to shorten in autumn, the birds return to the warmer regions where food supply varies a little with season. I mean, in Africa, they can find food for a long time. So these advantages of finding food offset the high stress and the physical exertion costs and other risks that migration will put in their way. These are cranes. Sometimes we see cranes on migration here. Sometimes we see small flocks. Sometimes we see just single birds. But the cranes are one of the species that over the past few years has been changing a bit its migration patterns, and more of them are staying in Europe rather than keeping migrating south. So here we start seeing what nature does, because predation is heightened during the migration season. Of course, these are young peregrines from the birds that were breeding at Dingley Cliffs. The peregrines were extinct for a number of years, and in 2009 we found a pair breeding at Dingley Cliffs, and within a couple of years we had up to 4 pairs breeding in the Maltese Islands, one in Gozo, one in Comino, and 2 in Malta. And these birds, their breeding starts early, because we think the breeding season starts in March or April, but actually the breeding season of birds which are sedentary starts much earlier. Like sparrows, for example, sometimes have already eggs in the nests in December, especially when the weather is mild. Most of them are already breeding in January. Peregrines start breeding in late February. So the hatching of the young coincides with the peak migration, where there are obviously more birds flying by, and so they can feed their young more easily. And you can see that there is a good food supply by the amount of chicks that you see. Peregrines usually have 1, 2, maybe 3 chicks if there is good food supply, and there is evidence of good food supply here. You have 3 chicks here. So that's one of the ways that nature operates. So birds of prey try to maximize on migrating birds. Here we have a sequence of a number of pictures, and it's a young bird which is training how to catch prey. For a young bird, it chose a wrong prey because it's much bigger than it. It's choosing yellow-legged gull. But you can see that birds try. Even though the gull is bigger than them, they still try to catch it. And sometimes with the help of adult birds, it's usually the adult bird that catches the bird. And we've seen this more than once. One of the bird distracts the bird, and the other bird comes from behind and takes the bird. So the bird would be distracting the gull from the front. Usually the male distracts the gull, and it's the female that does the catching, because the female is about a third bigger. So it will be about 300 grams heavier than the male, and it has more power to attack the gull. And we've all seen them working in pairs to take the gulls. This is a merlin in winter. So birds of prey feed on birds all year round, obviously. This is a wintering bird, the merlin. Starlings are wintering, and they are a good food source for them. So birds have a lot of enemies running after them. This is a picture not taken in Malta, it's taken in Poland, but here you can see a sparrowhawk chasing a magpie. Sometimes this is a young sparrowhawk. It's not necessarily trying to catch the magpie, but it will be training, because a magpie is a bit too big for a young sparrowhawk. An adult would be experienced how to deal with it, but a young bird wouldn't be. But sometimes you see these learning flights dashing past them and scaring the living daylights out of these birds. But very often they are obviously successful, and sparrowhawks are very good at taking birds at a very close range. And peregrines need a lot of distance to be able to catch their prey, but sparrowhawks, on the other hand, catch birds within a very short distance. And the experience of a lot of people in Europe is that when they have bird tables where they feed the birds, they often notice presence of sparrowhawks in their gardens, because sparrowhawks realize that there are quite a lot of birds in the garden and start coming there to try and catch their food from the bird table themselves. And so they start designing bird tables in a way that sparrowhawks will not be able to catch the birds in their gardens. So we have peregrine falcons breeding in spring, but the beauty of nature, we also have another species of falcon, the Eleonora's falcon, which breeds in autumn. And this is obviously an evolutionary development in these falcons. These falcons breed in the same type of habitats. But obviously, if they try to coexist, they're going to have a problem with finding enough food for the young. So there was this evolutionary development, and the Eleonora's falcons breeds late in summer. They start breeding usually in August and September. And when their young hatch, it coincides with the peak migration in autumn. So when the peregrine does in February, this bird does in September. So in fact, Eleonora's falcons, we only see Eleonora's falcons from August onwards, because they will be returning from their wintering grounds, and they will be returning from Africa to their breeding grounds in Europe. So it's really fascinating to see how evolution changed birds, and so that they are adapted to be able to feed and raise their young in different ways. Bosquet is a good place to see them, but also sometimes you see them along the coast. We have one breeding record in the late 70s of these. They had British Fendi because they like to breed in sea cliffs. Maybe one day they start breeding here too. These birds have amazing journeys. So you can see where they breed in Europe. They breed in islands in Greece and in Sardinia and in Morocco. And they winter, they spend the rest of their time they spend the spring really and summer in Madagascar, and they come into Europe to breed in autumn. So after they fledge in autumn, they leave for winter in Madagascar, and they stay there till the following summer. So all of the European population of Eleonora's falcons winters and then spends most of the rest of its life in Madagascar before coming again to breed in Europe. So we're talking of migration, of sort of this movement north and south, but we have another kind of migration in the world. I mean, we don't see this in Malta, but we call this altitudinal migration, because some migrants which live in areas with mountains, in winter, they migrate to the lower parts of the mountain where they can find food, and in summer they move to the higher parts of the mountain because snow would have melted, and they will find their food supply there. So migration is not just across seas or across continents, but it can also be within the same place. So this is a kind of migration. We don't, of course, see this in motor, as I said, but it's a known phenomenon. So in the tropics, there is very little variation in length of day throughout the year. It's warm enough for food supply, but altitudinal migration enables the birds to obtain more source of their preferred food, such as fruits, for example. So you will find them at different levels in different times of the year. And within a particular population, it's very common to have different ages and sexes, which have different patterns of timing and distance that they cover. So migration is not a phenomenon that affects all birds in the same way. For example, in autumn, chaffinches, Sponsonian Maltese, it's been found that female chaffinches migrate much earlier than males do, for example. So these are some of the routes that the birds take. They fly from Fennoscandia into the Norwegian Peninsula, and some of them go to Europe. And more females tend to migrate than males, or males can migrate much later. And this is why, if you have had to speak to people who used to trap finches, they would tell you they used to trap more female finches than more female chaffinches than males. And this is the reason, because they would be trapping birds from Fennoscandia, and more females migrate than males. So migration very often starts with birds flying off in a broad front. So as we're seeing in those radar images in America, and then in a lot of different places, you would see these mushrooms swelling. And then they can congregate because geographic barriers lead them to certain places. For example, you may have heard of Batumi, for example, in Georgia. It's a very big hotspot for birds of prey, particularly in autumn. In autumn again, from summer, from mid-August to late October. Tarifa and Gibraltar in Spain. At the moment, there is already heavy migration there of white storks and black kites, birds coming from Africa in the reverse direction that you see here in red. So the Straits of Gibraltar is just a 14-kilometer stretch. And if you happen ever to be in the south of Spain, in the region of Marbella, and you drive past Gibraltar and the Terry and Tarifa, if you're ever in the region from mid-August onwards, stop and spend some time and look up, because you will often see a lot of birds, and if you're there in the right day, you will see tens of thousands of birds within a couple of hours, because wind conditions affects birds in a very big way. The first time I went to Tarifa, we had been there for about 4 days, and we're seeing very little birds every day. There were strong westerly winds, and the moment that the wind stopped, there was literally the floodgates of birds open. You see 10,000 storks in 4 hours, and a lot of black kites and eagles and those sorts of other birds. So even though it's just a short 14-kilometer crossing, these birds with big wings resent big sea crossings, and they would wait for favorable weather conditions to cross, even though you could see the land on the other side of the strait, because from Tarifa you could see the African continent very clearly. But yet the birds are afraid to take the plunge, so to speak. Typically, routes follow mountain ranges or coastlines, sometimes taking advantage of updrafts. I just realized I'm overrunning, so I'll try to rush a bit through this. Specific routes may be genetically programmed or learned through varying degrees. So in migration, as I'm saying, there is a lot of clear patterns, but there are a lot of exceptions that we are still unable to explain. These are short-winged eagles. This is one of the examples that we cannot explain, for example, locally. These are broad-winged birds. As you can see, they have very wide wings, long wings. So you would imagine they are quite strong flyers. But what they do is they use the heat from the land. They use the updrafts to fly up and up, usually 1,000 meters or even more. And they fly in the turbines without moving their wings because they literally glide. The glide would take them down to the sea, and then they have to start flapping to reach their destination. So these birds migrate in daytime because they need the heat of the land. So if you're in places like Spain, for example, you'll start seeing a few of these at daybreak, but you'll see many more when it's 10 o'clock, when the ground and the air is hot. And they will wait for thermals because they need the heat from the air to lift them up, because they cannot maintain active flight for a very long distance. So this is quite a big question mark. I'll mention this, but I cannot explain it. So in Malta, in some years, we see eagles. Sometimes we see single birds. Sometimes we see dozens. Sometimes we see hundreds. I mean, 3 years ago, I think we must have seen about 300 short-tailed eagles in a 3-day period. And we don't know where these birds are coming from, because we know from satellite tracked birds from Naples, for example, so that these birds, instead of taking the red route through Sicily and to Cape Bon, these birds fly all the way up to Italy. They cross France, they cross Spain to be able to cross the 14-kilometer crossing in the strait. And year after year, satellite tracked birds from Italy are going through this long journey to go to Africa, rather than taking a shorter cut overland here. But there is a big sea crossing here, at least 150 kilometers, and they prefer to fly, take the long way faster, and they would prefer to go over the sea. So where do the short-tailed eagles that we see in Malta come from? We have no idea, because even the birds from Greece, for example, they prefer to go east through the Bosphorus in Turkey, and then they keep going down to the Suez, while the birds in Italy, they will go all the way up, as I showed you. Different regions of Italy, they all take the same route through France and Spain. So satellite tracking is telling us quite a lot about birds these days, especially birds that can take trackers. This is a story I had done for the Times when I was working for the Times quite a long time ago. So sometimes birds migrate to breed, and sometimes they take a long flight in vain because they arrive too late at the breeding sites, and they will be unable to breed. And this is a bird in question. This is a Finnish honey buzzard, which they named Päivi. It's still alive. So I'm going to show you a few tracks of this bird. So this is the first flight it did. Spent the night in Malta. Ironically, it slept in a place, in a carob tree in Safi, by a tree which is called Tree Kuchart, Honey Buzzard Street. So probably it knew that it had a street named after it. It slept there for a night and continued with its journey. This is the longest migrating honey buzzard they have. They never had a honey buzzard which went so far down in South Africa. So that's spring migration for you. So autumn migration, spring migration, autumn migration, similar to the first one, but similar but not quite. So these are different migration routes that this bird has taken over the years. So why is it that in some years it took a quasi-similar route, and in other years it took a completely different route? It probably had something to do with weather, we don't know. But here we can see that birds don't follow always the same route. So this idea that there was in the past, that there's a kind of route that birds must follow, this is showing you it's not necessarily the case. So here you can see those routes which appear to be quite close, and in reality you see how far it is. So one of the routes that crossed over Malta is when it stayed here. So we had one, it flew further east, one flew further west, and one more to the west from us. So more or less the same route, but you can see it's really miles apart when we're looking at the map in a closer distance. But then the wintering area is always the same. So the start point and the end points are the same, irrespective of the routes that the birds take. And this is one of the things that make us wonder what makes the bird go to the same place. For example, satellite tracked ospreys. With satellite tracking, you can pinpoint the birds with accuracy to about 20 meters where they are, and they are found to be using the same telegraph pole year after year in winter on which to rest after catching fish. So the birds know their wintering areas and use them year after year. So most birds migrate in flocks, and there is a good reason for this, because it reduces energy cost. So a goose would lose the lifting power of the bird in front of it. So this is really physics now. Hard to believe, but that's the way they do it, and they save between 12 and 20% of energy they would need when flying alone, when flying in groups. And this is also in waders. This is a flock of senderling, but dunlins, which are very similar to these. Radar studies found that birds which fly in flocks fly up to 5 kilometers an hour faster than when they are flying alone. So it's quite 5 kilometers an hour might not seem much, but it's quite a lot when you have to travel thousands of kilometers. They also fly at varying altitudes, and the highest altitude so far, black-tailed godwits, they've become very rare on migration here, but they've been found at 5,000 meters on the Kumbu Glacier. Pintails, which are ducks, they have been found skeletons have been found on Mount Everest, also at 5,000 feet, which means the birds were flying at that distance there. Nobody took the pintail there in that place, leave it there. And bar-headed geese have the record flying at 6,000 meters, 6,500 meters while crossing the Himalayas. So some birds can really fly at high altitudes. And this diagram shows some bird species in relation to aircraft. I will not go into this in this talk, but you might have heard the term bird strikes, and sometimes there are bird collisions with aircraft, and it is one of the reasons why we study birds, is to try and predict certain altitudes and try to avoid this. So when you know that there are flight lines and there are birds crossing them, they try to do something about it. I mean, in Israel, they are very good at this. They've installed radars. They've lost 2 aircraft costing about 16 million each, and they realize they have to do something about it. And sometimes the whole Israeli Air Force is grounded because there is strong migration. So it can be quite an issue in areas where it is intense. So I'll deal very briefly with this because this is so far away, but I have to tell you about it. Even birds that don't fly migrate. So penguins, for instance, they migrate by swimming, and they often cover routes of up to 1,000 kilometers by walking or swimming. So they walk on ice and they swim, and they go off to their breeding and wintering places. Emus in Australia, they undertake long distance movements on foot during droughts. They cannot fly, but they still move from place to place. Dusky grouse, for example, they migrate altitudinally in mountains, and they literally walk up and down the mountains. One of the things that we know for sure about migration is that some species that move short distances, they are not really programmed to move to respond to a changing day length, like accenters, for example. These are quite rare in Malta, but usually we get individual records of them in winter. In summer, you'd find them in altitudes of over 5,000 meters in the mountains, even nearby Italy. In winter, they will come down in villages, and some of them even migrate across the sea, because sometimes we see them, whenever you see these birds, you see them in areas with cliffs. So usually instead of responding to day length, they move in response to local weather conditions. So they move down from mountain tops to the lower plains, and they sometimes migrate too. Dippers are another species like accenters. Usually find them in low areas in winter, and in higher areas in summer. You'd find them up in the mountains. Other species such as merlin and skylark, for example, they move to the coast towards the south, and some of them, their migration stops there. For example, in the UK, a lot of skylarks don't migrate. They move from their breeding grounds to areas like in the south of Britain, and they spend their winter there. And obviously, the birds of prey like the merlin, which is very fond of skylarks, you'd find them wintering there because their prey sources are there. Species like this chaffinch, which you mentioned earlier. So we've got The Scandinavian population migrates, but the British population hardly ever moves more than 5 kilometers throughout their life. So it's not just a question of weather. This is probably an example of evolution. In a number of years' time, probably the British population of chaffinch will be declared as a different species from the chaffinches that are living in Scandinavia, because they would be adapting to a different environment. This is a picture of a bird taken in Spain, incidentally, and if you look at its feet, it's full of mites. This is a very, very old bird. In places where bird can live for long times, very often birds contract diseases because they are so old. You can even see its bill is overgrown as a very, very old male. So you would see that nature is trying to get rid of it in the process. If we have to look basically at a few maps, for example, finches that from ringing, we know that finches that we see in Malta are mostly coming from former Eastern European countries to the northeast, or slightly to the north, like for example linnets, joyini, and chaffinches and greenfinch come from areas mainly to the north of us, while siskins and serin come more from Eastern European countries. And the siskins are the bird that I was telling you. They don't really migrate, but they erupt. They move according to whether there is food or not. But they also, of course, they are migrating long distances. Sorry, for some reason sometimes it doesn't move. Okay. Swallows, for example, swallows Khuttaf and Maltese. We'll start seeing these birds in the countryside very soon. We've already seen the first ones. This is a particular small bird which makes really long flights. So British swallows winter in South Africa. Quite a lot of distance. Swallows from Eastern European countries winter in South Africa, or even from Scandinavian countries. So the swallow is a typical bird associated with migration. I'm sorry for this, but it seems to be freezing. So if we look at some ringing data from swallows, you can see a lot of swallows from Scandinavian countries. Recovered in different places in Europe. So initial red dots and end dots where they were recovered, but you see quite a lot of them moving through to South Africa. So it's quite a long journey for such a tiny bird. One thing that you have to keep in mind, you are seeing straight lines there. Birds don't fly in a straight line, but rather in a crooked line with detours around geographical barriers. So they can migrate overseas, but they have to go around the mountain or mountain ranges, and because of lack of stopover sites or feeding sites, sometimes they cannot stop, but they have to keep moving. So some species, such as tube noses, like among shearwaters, these breed in the cliffs in the park, like shearwaters. This is a chorus shearwater, which breeds in cliffland and dingley cliffs. Some of them migrate very large distances along oceans. So basically, migration trips of around 14,000 kilometers are quite ordinary for these birds. Albatrosses, for example, they literally circle the world, flying over the oceans, the southern oceans. Arctic terns, the bird you see on the top left, they migrate from the North Pole to Antarctica. And sooty shearwaters spend their lives at sea, going around, literally flying around the oceans. They only go to land in the breeding season. So from satellite tracking that has been done from projects by BirdLife of Scopolis shearwater. Scopolis shearwater are pelagic. They spend their entire life at sea, except during the breeding season when they come into land. So they are here in very big numbers in summer. This is a scene of Schlendi cliffs of Tachench in very typical in August and September. And they come into land only at night to brood the eggs or to feed their young. and most of the population of scopolis shearwater winters off Mauritania. Like all the other Mediterranean populations of shearwaters that breed in Italy and in Greece, all of them winter off the coast of Mauritania. So as you can see, when you have the European population of these shearwaters is breeding in out of Mediterranean islands, from the Aegean, from Turkey to the islands near Spain. There are quite large populations of shearwaters in these islands, but all of them would be concentrated in this patch of sea of Mauritania. So if something happens there, it could easily deal a big blow to the European breeding population of these birds. So most of our birds would be about 5,000 kilometers away from our shores. The Arctic tern, this is a very, very rare species of tern. There are very few records of it. They hold the long distance migration records for birds because they travel at least 19,000 kilometers between the Arctic breeding grounds and the Antarctic. They literally fly across the oceans from the North Pole to the South Pole. So that's quite something. But I think one of the most impressive flights, and we're coming very close to the end of our presentation, but we'll end with something local too. Bar-tailed godwits, they are powered migrants. By powered migrants, we mean they have to flap their wings in order to fly. Like birds of prey, they can stretch their wings and the hot air keeps them in the air. They glide. But these birds have to flap. They don't have the luxury of soaring or gliding. And these birds are present in Europe and they're also present in Australia. Something wrong because it's saying this screen sharing is paused.
I can't see anything on my side. I don't know. It says it's paused. Ah, okay.
No, everything seems to be working.
But the problem is that I think it stopped and I have to. But anyway, I'll go here again.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So these birds breed also in Alaska. I have to go back. I'm sorry for this. It's going in the wrong direction. Okay. So these birds breed in Alaska and Siberia, and they spend the winter in New Zealand. We also have European populations of these, but this is a very interesting study that has been done in Australia. I'll show it to you. So basically, these birds are spending their winter here in the South Pacific Ocean, and they start migrating at about this time in the middle of March, and their flight in 2 days. They fly this whole entire length of sea, and they go to the Yellow Sea in China, where they spend 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and then they continue with the rest of their trip. So this first part of the trip is about 10,000 kilometers, and it takes them 6 to 8 days non-stop to do that. So when you think about it, 6 to 8 days flying constantly, it's quite something. And then they continue the rest of the journey. They fly to the Bering Strait into Alaska, where they fly at least another 5,000 kilometers to reach their breeding ground. So in all, they would have flown about 15,000 kilometers to get to their breeding grounds, and they do this in 2 legs, so to speak. So in August, they start preparing to fly south again, and birds, all species of birds accumulate fat fuel. They eat more so that their body will have an amount of fat, and that they will use that fat to help them fly throughout the journey. It's their food throughout the journey. But an amazing thing that happens in these birds is that their intestines shrink so that there is actually more room for fat. So when you're flying, they don't need the gizzard, they don't need their stomach anymore, they don't need their intestines. I wish I could do that. And they lose a lot of weight from shrinking stomach, shrinking intestine, shrinking gizzard, but they would be making way for fat. So their body would be really bursting with fat. And they really need it because the flight back is a non-stop flight, straight flight across the Pacific Ocean. So these birds leave Alaska at the end of August, and they fly non-stop for at least 11,000 kilometers. And they fly at about, they cover about 1,000 kilometers a day, flying non-stop, flapping non-stop. And I think this is truly amazing. Not just the journey itself, 11 days. I mean, some of us trek, some of us run, some of us jog. You know, you jog a kilometer, 5 kilometers, and your heart is coming out of your mouth literally, no matter how hard you train. And these birds fly 11 days non-stop to reach their destination. But even more impressive than the flight is the orientation. I mean, any of you who have been on a boat, you know, they do a round trip of 21,000 kilometers. But if you've been on a boat and you're out of a harbor and you realize that if you have a degree of bearing, you know, you'll miss Sicily from Malta. And these birds flying across 11,000 kilometers, they keep track of side winds, of headwinds, of tailwinds, and they still arrive at the same place they need to arrive. I mean, if they drift by a fraction of a degree, you know, they will end up either in Australia or somewhere in the South Pacific Ocean, where they will die because they can't fly anymore. But these birds do it year after year. There are some birds which have been given names now, and then they're avidly followed by people on the internet. You know, when they depart, and they are happy to see them arrive year after year. They keep a proper compass, and year after year they're doing this phenomenal journey. And unlike terns and shearwaters, for example, powered migrants don't have the luxury of stopping over the sea. For example, shearwaters that live in Malta and are spending their winter 5,000 kilometers away. If a shearwater is tired, it will just settle on the sea and rest and then take off again. But godwits cannot do this. They have to keep flying. So that's really amazing. So I think that's such a migration in 9 days is truly remarkable. So I'll rush a bit through this so that because I'm running over my time here. But I'll just mention a few other species that we see locally. Swifts, for example, rundum, birds that we see in our skies from March, April onwards. And these birds over the past 10 years or so have started to breed in increasing numbers. Their migration patterns are equally impressive. So swifts spend their entire life in the air. They even sleep in the sky. They reduce their heartbeat and sleep in the sky and only come to land in the breeding season. And these travel daily trips of 260 to 480 kilometers on migration in spring. And they can spend between 30 and 99 days on migration. And again, in autumn, they travel even more longer distances in autumn. And they do it in a shorter time, so they would be flying more during an entire day. Cuckoos, which we'll start seeing on migration now too, they really have very interesting migration patterns too. So these birds are interesting because these birds don't build nests, but usually they find the nest of another species, throw away an egg or eat it, lay an egg in that nest, and when the chick hatches, it will throw away the other chicks or the other eggs from the nest, and the birds will have to feed it, and it will be a bird like a robin or a black redstart or a redstart, for example, and or a reed warbler, and suddenly the bird will realize that it's feeding a bird which is 5 times its size. But they keep feeding them because they are in their nest, and the cuckoos fledge, and cuckoos undertake these phenomenal loop migrations. So you see the yellow is the migration out of the breeding area, and the red is the migration back to the breeding areas. So they take this kind of loop migration, and that explains why certain species are seen more than others in different seasons. Okay, I mix this up because actually the red is the April migration. The red is going back to the breeding site. That is why we see more cuckoos in spring than we see in autumn, because they have this kind of loop migration. This is a snipe, the bird that changed my life, but I'm going to speak about the great snipe, which is very similar to this bird. And these two have been found to have phenomenal migrations. So the snipe is about half the size of a pigeon. And Thomas Allerstam, who's one of the gurus in ornithology, he's done some amazing studies with these birds from Sweden. So he's found that by putting geolocators on these birds and retrieving them a year later, the blue dots show the wintering areas where the birds are spending their winter, and the green dots show the breeding areas, and the orange dots show the stopover sites. The red lines are non-stop flights. So quite impressive. So these birds would soon be leaving, at this time of the year, they would be leaving Africa. Some of them will be flying over us. Some will stop here probably, but most of them won't, because they really have long abilities to fly, 3 days non-stop to get where they need to get to. In spring, when they're going back to Africa, it's even more impressive because the birds fly longer. As you can see, the red lines, which are the continuous flights, are much longer than they were in autumn. So again, the green dots are the breeding sites, the yellow dots are the stopover sites, and the blue dots are the wintering sites, the final sites. So you can see that these birds leave Sweden and reach the African coast, cross the Sahara, and keep going down to the heart of Africa without stopping. And sometimes they fly non-stop at about a speed of about 96 kilometers an hour for more than 64 hours, which is quite something for a little bird. So that's more than 2.5 days, covering 5,500 kilometers, which is a hell of a lot of distance. I will end with these. These are some studies which we started doing here. With harriers, we started the project with the Malta International Airport because the airport is a very good area that attracts birds. But the problem is we don't want birds at the airport because of bird strikes. And there were a couple of incidents. And so we're trying to do a project to see if we catch the birds from the airport and release them away from the airport, that the birds to go back or not. So we did 2 satellite track birds from there. And this is a project that should be continuing for the next few years. COVID stopped us last year and this year. But these are the results from the first year that we did them. This is a male montagus harrier. So the bird was tagged in Malta, flew through Sicily and Italy, and went to breed about 100 kilometers south of Moscow. And on the way down, it took a completely different route, flew through Turkey, went through Syria and Lebanon, survived, and went to winter in Africa. But one of the astonishing things that this bird showed us, for example, that the bird left Greece on 4th September at 6 in the morning, and it arrived near the Sea of Galilee the day later at 4 p.m. So this bird flew 34 hours non-stop, covering around 900 kilometers. And if you look at the map, you could see there were several places the bird could have stopped. The bird could have stopped in Cyprus. The bird could have stopped in Lebanon, in Damascus. But the bird kept going because its destination was the Golan Heights for the day. So birds have no fixed patterns when they migrate. Usually when they have such a long-haul trip after 34 hours non-stop, if you analyze the data, we'd find it will spend 2 or 3 days in the area then, like to recover from such a flight. But no wonder, 34 hours non-stop, covering 900 kilometers is no joke. And since it left Malta, it covered at least 36,000 kilometers. Unfortunately, this bird was probably killed in Serbia. But this is the migration route it took. And that red line is the continuous flight that I've just spoken about. And we had another bird, a female pellet harriers. Pellet harriers are beginning to migrate right now through Malta. Again, this had an even more impressive flight because this bird went to breed near the Ural Mountains, literally on the border with Mongolia. So it's quite a big distance away, and it wintered in Niger. Again, this bird was probably killed in Niger because unfortunately we didn't hear more from it. But this bird flew at least 19,000 kilometers within a few months since it left Malta. And this too had a very impressive flight. So it left Greece on 21st October, and it reached Libya on 22nd October. A 39-hour non-stop flight covering 1,300 kilometers. And what's even amazing about this flight, more than the montagus harrier, apart from the fact that it's a much longer flight, if you notice, these triangles are the direction of flight. When the birds reached with the bird regionally being coast, you would have assumed that the bird would try to rest because it had already covered 970 kilometers before reaching Libya. But no, it flew another 500 kilometers inland before it stopped to rest. So birds are able to undertake quite long journeys. And I like to show this to hunters, these slides to hunters, and to convince them that they shouldn't be shooting these birds. And when you show them the maps and the distances that these birds fly, you always get the same reaction, that it's not right to kill them. So it's a soft approach to education. This is the end of my talk. Birds navigational skills are really amazing, and I think they're beyond our real comprehension. And I hope that I managed to touch some of you with these. And if you have any questions, I'll take them. I know I'm overrunning. Apologies for that. But any questions I can take them. I'll stop sharing. And
Thank you. Thank you, Natalina. That was fascinating. And I think most people didn't mind it overrunning because it's such an interesting topic, learning about birds. And your great photos as well, they always astound me. And I'm really glad everyone got to see a talk with you after I attended your lectures recently. So I'm really happy about that. I just wanted to mention about off-roading at Majjistral Park. We are doing a lot of work in the park to try and reduce it as much as possible at the moment. So our rangers are working really hard, and our staff in the office, there are now permits to enter the park with vehicles, but it's only specific, permits will be given out. And we're trying to encourage people to keep dogs on leashes, especially during bird migration and nesting season. And yeah, we haven't had any questions apart from somebody talking about how many storks nests there are in Poland usually, but this year there seems to have been a decrease. So I don't know whether it's worth saying something. I don't know if there's been any studies about the general bird numbers in the world, whether people are, I think I've read a few things that people are worried at the moment because they're decreasing.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems, I just touched upon it earlier in the talk. Tourism hunting is bad for two reasons. One, it's largely uncontrolled, and secondly, it encourages local population to do what they're doing. So I could see this firsthand. I used to go to Tunisia very often in the early 1980s. I used to go bird watching there 3 times a year. And the Italian hunters had just started to begin to hunt in Tunisia. So my first tours in Tunisia, and I used to go around quite a lot, you hardly ever saw any hunting. There used to be some locals hunting some ducks here and there, and it was really negligible. But within 3 or 4 years, the amount of people hunting in Tunisia became so big because the Italian hunters started going there. So it was easier for them to start leaving the guns behind, to find them there when they go back, rather than taking the guns each time because of customs control and this, that, and the other. And if you leave guns behind, the locals are going to use them. And shooting can be fun. The gun gives you a kick. You hit something, you pick it up. I can understand the thrill it can give you. But when you think about what you're doing, the problem is that these people, it happened here too. I mean, if you had to read what one of the founders of the Federation for Hunting and Conservation wrote, he's long dead in the 70s, who was complaining in the 70s that sort of, because of the socioeconomic situation in Malta, money had brought guns within reach of everybody, but people's minds had not evolved enough for how to use the gun. So this is a hunter talking about it. So we could see that happening. And we could see this happening all over. I mean, if you see what they do in Lebanon, in Syria, for example, it's like mindless people shooting birds out of the sky and shouting and chanting. It's like it's a celebration. I'm not surprised Polish storks would be decreasing because these birds would spend 4 or 5 months in Africa. The chances of them getting shot there is becoming increasingly bigger year after year. because these birds will spend their winter in the same areas as we have seen by the ospreys, for example, and by the honey buzzards. The moment that people find out where they are, it's so easy to kill them. I mean, people have cars, people have powerful guns. Today's guns are not the guns of 30 years ago. The ammunition is much stronger, they have a much longer range. I mean, and for a lot of people in these countries, these are still food. And I remember, for example, one thing a French hunting guide once told me, he said, just tell your friends to stop putting colored rings on storks and these birds, because the locals kill them to make necklaces from their rings. So when you hear these things, it's some things become eye openers.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Sometimes we create impacts without wanting to do that, really. But
yeah, we have a question.
Can birds sleep while flying? Yeah, there are quite a number of birds that sleep while flying. Swift, for example, is one of them. But most birds don't sleep while flying. It's only certain species which are able to do that. They would reduce their heart rate. They would fly at a kind of altitude, for example, 2,000 feet, and because it's a safe altitude where they don't hit anything else. And but they can cover large distances while asleep. But they're the kinds of birds which are sort of in flight all the time, that are able to sleep on the wing. Other birds need to sleep on land, so not all of them do it.
And about them having an inner radar.
Watching them by radar?
No, do they have some sort of inner radar so they don't fly into something?
Yeah, birds. This is evolving. This study in this area is evolving just now. Birds have some receptors in their eyes, which are magnetic receptors, and birds align themselves usually to the north. And experiments by this had been done by German ornithologists way back, about 60 years ago at least, Friedrich Naumann. And what he did was he was putting birds in cages and putting blotting paper and an ink pad. So the birds, the perch for the birds was an ink pad. And when the migration stimulus hits them, he would notice that the birds were jumping always to the same side of the cage, which is pointing north. So because they would find the footprints on the blotting paper. So he's getting the ink from the perch, and he's always jumping on the same side of the cage. And they could confirm that this is truly a magnetic thing, because if they alter the magnetic field using magnets to alter the true north, the birds still went to where he thought the north is. So they conclude they must have some sensors that detect where north is. And recent studies have found that, for example, robins have certain receptors in their eyes, which are sensitive to magnetic fields. So
amazing. There's been lots
older
of
birds. Yeah, older birds usually migrate before younger birds, because the older birds are more experienced. The older birds know the way. And actually, we can see this from honey buzzards in Malta, for example, because most birds that we see earlier in the season are adults, and we see the juveniles, sort of a week or so later. But also, we see fewer adults than young birds. And the reason is mainly because the adult birds choose a shorter route. So from satellite tracking, you can see that the first year the bird might cross from Sicily to Malta and go to Libya. And the second year that bird would go Sicily, Cape Bon, bypassing Malta, because the flight over the sea there is shorter. So they learn to try and find a shorter route. Now, how they learn, we don't know. They might follow adults, or they might follow other birds. It's, for example, with vultures, for sure, that birds learn from other birds. With Egyptian vultures, for example, from the project that they have been doing in Sicily, most times the vultures would follow other birds and fly to Cape Bon directly. When they don't follow other birds, they come to Malta. They take the longer route. or sometimes they leave and then they go back because they lose heart or they think they can't make it. They go back.
Interesting.
Okay, last year's very poor finch migration. Yep. I have a theory about this. I mean, it's a theory. I mean, I've discussed this with a number of trippers before. But I think the season was poor not because the birds didn't migrate. I think the birds migrated and didn't stop. I think it's a question of weather. If there is bad weather during the peak migration season, you will see more birds because bad weather forces the birds to land. If the weather is good, as we have seen by the case of the snipe, birds have the stamina, they can keep migrating. I mean, birds only land if they really need to, or if they are attracted, you know, if they are pulled down by callers, for example. But usually, if they have enough stamina, birds continue to migrate. It could be some of them more of them are wintering on the northern shores of the Mediterranean. I mean, I don't know if this is the case with finches, but for example, yellow wagtails. Spain 20 years ago in southern Spain, you would never see yellow wagtails in winter. But over the past 20 years, they've noticed that there's an increasing yellow wagtail population that is wintering in southern Spain. So previously you saw none, and now in certain areas of La Honda, for example, which is in Tarifa, there is a roost of over 4,000 wagtails, for example, which is similar to the ones we have in Girgenti, quite a large roost of yellow wagtails. So the birds are staying in Spain, not migrating to Africa. And this is also partly because of global warming. So the climate, if it's just 1 or 2 degrees higher, it can make all the difference for the birds to survive in that kind of climate.
Okay, so weather is really important. I think doesn't look like there's any other questions.
This question came from Jeffrey. Jeffrey is a Gozetan, and he's taking really good pictures. So we'll start seeing your pictures again, Jeffrey, hopefully very shortly.
I think the photos are so important because it reels so many people in to showing what birds are like and showing their behaviors and everything.
There's been quite a revolution in that respect. If people like Jeffrey want to speak, he can express his sentiments about it. But quite a lot of hunters and trappers have started taking pictures of birds, and quite a number of them are enjoying that instead of what they used to do before. So it's a personal conscious decision that they have taken, and I think we have to encourage more people to go that way, because we're not forcing them to do anything. It's a choice that they make, and when people take decisions out of choice rather than they have to do that, it's more lasting, you know.
Yes, definitely. If there aren't any other questions, someone said we have seen the number of harriers decreasing, especially in this time of year.
Decreasing, I mean, in this time of year, I think over the past years, they have actually increased the number of harriers locally, both in spring and especially in autumn. When I was young, harriers in spring were a rarity here in Malta. But over the past years, especially the number of marsh harriers, and we're seeing more pellet harriers because less of them are being shot. Pellet harriers were never common, but the fact that, I mean, we see more because less of them are being shot. There are days, for example, at the airport where you can see 6 or 8 pellet harriers within a couple of hours. And in places like Gozo at this time of the year, if you are there on the right day with migration, it's quite spectacular because you can see 200-300 birds coming in from the sea in a very short span of time, and it's quite a spectacle. So we'll be expecting some of your pictures, Jeffrey, from harriers in Gozo this year. We say public is aware of their effect. No, I don't think that people are aware at all of their impacts, not on just birds, on environmental impacts in general. I mean, I think the biggest problem is overpopulation again, because it's a question of scale. But people aren't aware. No, they aren't aware, and it's up to us to also to push to make them aware. Regarding to cats, for example, I mean, cat colonies are something that really irk me, and irk me in two ways, because I mean, I love animals, and I've often seen cats in cat colonies, you know, with missing ear or with missing eye, or which are sick, or you hear these arguments, cats are being neutered, and some of them are, and the people who feed them really love them. But if we're going to keep encouraging cat colonies, and if the government is going to keep giving money to local councils for people to buy cat food, these colonies will keep mushrooming. You know, I mean, I think it's about time that these are rounded up, and people who love them have to find a home, because cats do a lot of damage, not just to birds, geckos and then lizards. And I mean, in areas where you find cat colonies, you don't see anything. You don't see lizards, you don't see anything else, because they don't need to eat, because they are well fed, but they will still kill. Yeah, so.
Yeah, there's a nature reserve in Australia that they're having such big problems with cats that they're building a fence around the whole reserve, and it's a massive one, you know, in Australia. But that's the length that they're going to build this fence. And about compromises with dogs, I mean, I get people's points about, you know, having an area to let dogs off the leash. And in reserves in England, they have ponds that are for the birds and strictly no dogs, and then they have a pond a bit further away that are for dogs. So they kind of let them play around.
The size of the land is different.
Yeah, that's how they found a compromise abroad. But yeah, in Malta it's a bit of a problem because of the space. There's somebody else. 15 years ago, one could see big flocks, especially in March evenings here at Ramla Valley, but not anymore. We just see small numbers.
I mean, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know if it's Jeffrey who's asking me this, but does it have to do with disturbance? I mean, because Ramla Valley is a place where hares used to roost in reed beds, and if the reed beds are being accessed by people and the birds are disturbed, I mean, but I don't think that the number of harriers in spring hare, generic numbers, have decreased, because I think, if anything, numbers of sightings over the past years have tended to increase rather than decrease. But if it's something specific, I mean, we can discuss it at more length, Jeff, if you like.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, I won't keep you.
There's, just to let you know, lots of people are saying thank you so much for the talk. I can send you the chat afterwards. I think everyone
thanks for your interest.
really enjoyed it. No, thank you for doing it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. So we'll see you another time. We'll do something else about birds. I don't know. We'll do something about intelligence in birds or something like that.
Yes, that was a fascinating lecture.
We'll do one
yeah, that would be great. The videos of the crows doing tricks. Right, thank you so much for giving us this fascinating talk. And I hope everybody really enjoyed it, and that you'll join us for the next talk next month. I'm not positive what the topic's going to be quite yet. It might be about Yelko and shearwaters, but we'll keep you updated. If you want to join the mailing list and be told about future talks, the email is walks@majjistral.org, and that comes straight to me. So yeah, just let me know. Okay, right.
Thanks for your time.
No,
thanks.
Thank you.
Nice
thank you so much.
All right. If anyone has any difficulties, just go to Walks, email, and Tamsin will email. Okay, we'll get in touch.
Brilliant.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Good evening.